So the Gemara that we are learning, we're dealing with the laws of Shabbos and comparing them to the laws of Sukkah. And in truth, there's really differences between these two laws, because the laws of Shabbos prioritize the emphasis for the laws of Shabbos is that something should be that the area should be considered a reshus hayachid. It should be considered a private domain. Regarding the laws of Sukkah, it should be a type of structure. And there are different rules. We have halacha l'meisha Sinai's regarding Sukkah, that two walls should be solid, and the third wall could be a tefach. We have laws regarding Shabbos that involve creating a wall, which has to do with, even if it's that there are scenarios where you could have two parallel walls, and the third wall would be called a lechi. Would be a some type of just a little beam that's a pole that's attached to the two walls, and that's considered like the third wall. And according to biblical law, that would be considered a reshus hayachid, a private domain. So there's different laws regarding these two rules. And what the Gemara here is going to be telling us is that there's scenarios where, if on Shabbos it's called a wall, that will give us that could help us for Sukkah, or if Sukkah is considered a wall, could help us for Shabbos. And it would only work on the Shabbos of Sukkot, but it would be a great benefit. In other words, it would give us an interesting law that you would be able to rely on this halachic rule that applies really to Shabbos, but we could maybe connect it to Sukkah, or applies to Sukkah, maybe we connect it to Shabbos. So let's see what the Gemara says. So the Gemara's case is about Shtayim Kihil Chasan. It starts off with the law of the Mishnah that you need two walls, Shtayim Kihil Chasan. And so that's on the first word on the line on page 7a, about 12 lines up from the bottom, maybe 14 lines up from the bottom. So it's 7a. Let me tell you on the art. Pull it up here. We are on 7a, and 7a2, the last paragraph of the arts book. Last paragraph of 7a2. Okay, so we're on page 7a, and the Gemara says, Shtayim kihel chasan. You need two walls that are as they are supposed to be, meaning solid walls. And the third wall, even a tefach, even a handbreadth. Amar Rava v'chein l'Shabbos, or some say this is Rabbos. Rabbah says the same law applies to Shabbos. What does that mean? Migu davi doifen linyan sukkah havi doifen linyan Shabbos. Since it's considered a wall regarding Sukkah, it'll be considered a wall regarding Shabbos. So this would mean that you have two walls, and because you have two walls, and you add a tefach for the third wall, so that's considered a kosher sukkah, as we've been learning in previous Gemaras. You made a kosher sukkah. So the law is that that would actually work also regarding the laws of Shabbos. Now, Shabbos, you normally would need 4 walls, really. Rabbinically, you need 3 walls, plus a 4th wall, which the Gemara discusses like a lechi would be good for the 4th wall. But biblically, all you really need is 3 walls. And on the Shabbos, um, uh, uh, the law over here would be that for Sukkot it works. So for Shabbos, it's also going to work. Now, what would the case be? The case would be that your sukkah is right near your house. So you want to bring from your house into your sukkah. Now, if your sukkah is considered a private domain, then you can carry from your house into your sukkah. If your sukkah is considered a public domain, you will not be able to carry from your house into your sukkah.
If it's private, why can you carry from the house to the sukkah?
If it's a private domain, you're carrying from one private domain to another private domain. As long as there's nothing in the middle, as long as it's right next to it. It's next to your house. But if it's considered a public domain, then it would be a problem. So here, the law is that we're considering this sukkah to be a sukkah regarding the laws of sukkah, and therefore we're saying the same law would apply that for Shabbos as well. It would be considered a kosher sukkah. What is the case that we're talking about here? What type of sukkah are we specifically? What is the scenario of the walls? So if you look in Rashi over here, V'chein l'Shabbos, he says the same law applies. This is the Ravas or Rabbas din, that the same law applies to Shabbos. So I'm going to read this Rashi inside. It's on the first wide line. Even though on Shabbos you would need 3 walls to make it a Rishus HaYachid, in Rashi either means because biblically you need 3 walls, or he means you need 3 walls plus you would need something for a 4th wall. But Shabbos shel Sukkah is mutar l'smach al mechitzas haSukkah. But the Shabbos of Sukkahs, you could rely on the mechitzas, on the walls of the Sukkah. Im asa b'rishus harabim, if you made this Sukkah in the Rishus Harabim, samach l'pischai, next to your entrance. Im asa b'rishus harabim, samach l'pischai Sukkah de'in ba l'shtayim kilchasan, that you only have 2 walls. Ushlishes afilu tefach, and the 3rd one is even just a tefach. Machnisu moitzi heimena lebeisai, you could bring in and out from your house, and you could carry within it as well. Basically, you're building your sukkah right next to your house. Outside of your house is really a public domain. It's called the Rishus Harabim. However, your sukkah, if we could consider your sukkah a private domain, we don't have a problem. That means the area outside your sukkah is a public domain. But we need to try to make your area into a private domain. How are we doing that? We're doing that by calling your sukkah a private domain, because regarding the laws of sukkah, it's considered a private domain. It's considered a sukkah, a kosher sukkah. So because of that, we're going to allow you to even carry from your house into it, because it's considered like walls. What do you mean? On Shabbos, you need 3 solid walls, and the 4th wall you can get away with some easy fix. But on sukkah, you only have 2 walls in a tefach wall. It's good enough. Because for sukkah it's kosher, it's sukkah kosher for Shabbos as well. And then the Rashi continues as ba'afal gav de bashar Shabbosis le mishteri. Even though other Shabbosis, if you want to eat outside on Shabbos in the summer, you decide, you know what? Let me go and eat in the sukkah. Can you go into your sukkah during the summer and eat there and bring food there from your house? No. You don't have even 3 walls. You have 2 walls plus 1 handbreadth of a wall. That's not an eruv for Shabbos. Inami or b'shar mechitzos she'enon shel sukkah. Let's say it's on Sukkos, and you don't have a sukkah there. It just happens to be walls. You have 2 walls and a 3rd wall. You don't have a schach on top. It's not a kosher sukkah, but you have 2 walls and a tefach wall. Would that work on sukkahs to carry? You want to just carry something there. You're not going to eat there, okay? It's not a sukkah. But you want to carry, you have 2 walls and a tefach wall. No, that won't work even on sukkahs. Loy mishteri bahachi, it will not be kosher. But l'Shabbos the sukkah sharia. But for the Shabbos of sukkahs, you would be allowed to eat in this sukkah and carry stuff into the sukkah and carry stuff from your house into the sukkah. The migu dahahu tefach adbere achmana l'meisha b'chitza sukkah the levi leidofen shlema. Since the Torah has taught us, Hashem taught Moshe that regarding sukkah, this is called a wall. Havi doifen nami b'Shabbos the sukkah linyan Shabbos. It's considered a wall for the Shabbos of sukkahs regarding Shabbos. So we are considering this a good sukkah. Okay, so now I think we've clarified. We've got these 2 walls. You have a tefach wall. Regarding Shabbos, you need 4 walls, 3 solid walls, and you can get away with a lechi on Shabbos. But that, that's regarding the laws of Shabbos, at least rabbinically. But regarding the Shabbos on Sukkot, you can get away with even less than 3 walls. You can have 2 walls and a tefach. You get away with it. It's kosher for Sukkah. It's kosher for Shabbos. Okay, now comes the question, and this is where it gets a little hard, the wording over here. Esvei Abaye. Abaye now asks a question. Go back in the Gemara. Esvei Abaye. Abaye now asks a contradiction from a brisa. Umi amrinan migu. Can you say such a migu that if it works for Sukkah, it works for Shabbos as well? V'hatanya doifen Sukkah k'doifen Shabbos. We have a brisa that says, in the way Abaye is translating the brisa is as follows. He's translating it to mean the doifen Sukkah, the walls of a Sukkah, are similar to the walls of Shabbos. That if you have a Sukkah that has a fence around it, and the fence is not a solid fence, it's just poles. So you've got a number of poles that surround an area. Now that works for regarding Shabbos. It'll also work for a Sukkah. So if you just put poles up around your house, that could be a kosher Eruv, and it will be a kosher Sukkah because the laws of Shabbos are similar to the laws of Sukkah. Doifen Sukkah is Doifen Shabbos, just like the Doifen Shabbos. And however, there is a difference. It says that Yisera, that Shabbos is has certain laws that are more strict. Now, what are the rules with this case? You're just putting poles up. How does that work? That you put poles up, it's a kosher Eruv and it's a kosher Sukkah. Well, we learned the law of Lavud. Anything within 3 handbreadths is considered attached. So when you put poles up, every pole within 3 handbreadths, what you're actually doing is making a solid wall. A solid? There's 2.5 handbreadths in between every pole. That's considered solid because the law of Lavud says that's called solid. Now, I'll tell you something interesting. Regarding the laws of Shabbos, normally you need more solid than empty, than open. More solid than open. And if you make poles around your property for Shabbos, these poles are tiny, thin poles, a little, maybe a 1x1 pole. And you're putting them within 3 handbreadths of each other, and you go around your entire property. Would that be a kosher Eruv for Shabbos? So seemingly, you would think that shouldn't be good because it's majority open air, open space, and it's only a minority of a wall because you got little poles, and if you add up all the poles together, you got 1x1s, and you got maybe 50 1x1s, so you got 50 inches of solid. But guess how much you have open? You have 200 or more open space. But regarding the laws of Eruv, believe it or not, that's considered solid. we look at it as if it's all solid because it's within 3 handbreadths. Every pole is within 3 handbreadths. We look at that as if it's all solid because the law of Lovud is not just saying you can connect these, say they're attached. We actually look at it as if it's really attached and it makes it solid. So we've got a solid wall around my house, around my property, even though it's majority open and it's only little thin poles that are placed 2.5 handbreadths, 8 inches between each other. Between every pole, there's 8 inches of space, and each pole is only 1 inch. So if you add it all together, you got 8 times as much open space than solid space. Nevertheless, that is considered a kosher Eruv. It's considered solid regarding the laws of Shabbos. And the Gemara tells us here, this Brisa, it says the laws of Sukkah would be similar, that you could make a Sukkah that way as well. You have no horizontal beams. You only have vertical beams, poles, and they're not touching each other. But that's considered a solid wall. You got, if you make just like Sukkah, just like Shabbos, that works. The law is applicable for Sukkah as well. It's called Lovud. The Lovud rule that within 3 handbreadths is considered like a solid wall. So the Brisa says this general rule that this case of Sukkah would work regarding this case of Shabbos would work regarding Sukkahs. The laws of Sukkah is similar to Shabbos, and that would work. But then the Gemara says, but there are some differences. Now let's read it inside. V'hatanya, didn't we learn in a Brisa? Doifen Sukkah kedoifen Shabbos, the wall of a Sukkah, which we're the way I'm explaining it is that it's a vertical poles are considered similar to the wall of Shabbos, that it's kosher. Uvelvad, as long as as long as you don't have between one pole and the other pole shloisha tfachim, you don't have 3 handbreadths. So that would be a kosher sukkah, even though nothing is going horizontal. It's only vertical, but that would be considered good. V'yasera Shabbos al sukkah, but however, there are some differences. In the difference of Shabbos over Sukkah, Shabbos ain't any teres elo bo'emin merub parts. That regarding Shabbos, there's a rule that you need to have more solid than open. Now, our example that I just gave is called more solid than open because Lovud makes it like it's all solid. But what would happen if you have bigger gaps? If you had bigger gaps regarding the laws of Shabbos, that doesn't work. Because bigger gaps, if it makes it too much open, it will invalidate your Eruv. It will invalidate, and I don't just mean Eruv, the laws of Eruvin. I mean the wall to make it considered a private domain. Just think of making something into a private domain. So if you have too much open space, it won't be a private domain. Again, this is very important to clarify. When it's within 3 handbreadths, that's called solid. But when it's more than 3 handbreadths, that's when it starts we start calculating those spaces and consider them. Is it more majority open or is it majority closed? And the Brisa here says that when it's majority open, that doesn't work for Shabbos to make it into a private domain. You have to have solid majority al haparatz over the open. Masha'ain kain b'sukkah, however, that doesn't apply to sukkah. Sukkah, you can have majority open. What would be a case where you have majority open with regard to the laws of sukkah? Let's say you have 2 walls of a sukkah, solid walls, and you have a third wall that has a tefach, a handbreadth. Would that be called majority open or majority solid? If you have 2 walls, and the third wall is a tefach, is 1 handbreadth, would that be majority open or majority solid? Anyone?
Majority solid.
Majority solid, that's right, Yehuda. Why is it majority solid? Because when you have two walls, it makes it half and half. Two walls would be half open, half solid. And if you have an additional handbreadth of a wall for the third wall, it makes it majority solid. So you have majority solid in a sukkah, that's a kosher sukkah. But let me ask you a question. What happens if I make a door in my solid wall? I have a doorway. Would it still be kosher? Yes. You're allowed to have a doorway to get into your sukkah, in your solid wall. So if you make a doorway in your solid sukkah that's more than a handbreadth, guess what happens now? It's now considered majority open, because you were majority closed because of that extra handbreadth of your third wall. If you make a doorway in your two walls, that's considered kosher for a sukkah. It's majority open and it's a kosher sukkah. So the Brisa seems to be telling me an interesting law that regarding the laws of Shabbos, this won't work. It's not considered a private domain. But regarding the laws of Sukkah, this will work, and it will be considered a kosher Sukkah. So what will happen on the Shabbos of Sukkot? Shabbos of Sukkot comes in, and I have all my food in my house, and I want to bring it out into my Sukkah. But my Sukkah is considered a good Sukkah. It's a kosher Sukkah. It's got two walls. It has a doorway in one of the walls, but it's got two solid walls, and it has the third wall that's a tefach, that's a handbreadth, and its majority really is open because I have a doorway in one of my walls. It's majority open, but it's kosher for a sukkah. But guess what? It's not kosher for Shabbos. And therefore, on the Shabbos of Sukkot, I would not be able to use it to carry into it. I could maybe sit in it. I could maybe, if there's food already in it, I guess I could drink the food or eat the food that's in it. But I can't carry anything in it, and I can't carry anything to it, because it's considered a public domain, or it's near the public. It's part of the Rishus HaRabim, part of the public domain, or at least a Carmelis. It could be somewhere in the middle of as there are certain rules in Shabbos that get complicated, that there's like a middle ground. But it's definitely not a private domain regarding laws of Shabbos, because it's majority parutz. Majority is breached. That's the literal translation of parutz. Majority is breached. So regarding Sukkah, you can have majority breached, majority open. But regarding the laws of Shabbos, you need majority closed. That's what it sounds like. That's what the Brisa seems to be saying. Now, think about this law. So we just have the laws about this Sukkah that has a door opening, and we're not going to be allowed to carry on it on Shabbos of Sukkot, it sounds like. Now, what do you think the law should be according to Rava? Rava just said that when you have three walls
Restart
of a
computer.
Sukkah, well, what was that? Did you say something, Yehuda? Did I miss you? So regarding the law that Rava said, Rava talked about a case where you have two walls and the third is a tefach, and that normally would not be good enough regarding the laws of Shabbos. But he says, guess what? It is good enough regarding, because since it's a wall regarding Sukkah, it's a wall regarding Shabbos. Comes the Brisa, and the Brisa says the separate laws. Some things could work for Sukkah, doesn't work for Shabbos. Just because it's a wall regarding Sukkah doesn't make it a kosher wall regarding Shabbos. And that's we see over here with regard to it's too much open. If it's too much open, it's not going to work for the laws of Shabbos. It'll work for the laws of Sukkah. So you don't say this concept of called migu. So we're using a mechanism, this halachic mechanism called migu, and Rava wants to use it. He says, since migu, since something is a law regarding Sukkah, it's a law regarding Shabbos. Comes to the Brisa, and Brisa seems to be a contradiction on Rava. The Brisa is is a source that could prove Rava wrong, because Rava is an Amoira, it's a later rabbi, and the Brisa is an earlier statement from a Tanoic source, and Rava is called an Amoira, so Rava can't argue on a Brisa. The Brisa says that we don't have a concept of migu. We don't say migu. Since this is a law regarding Sukkah, it's a wall regarding Sukkah, it's a wall regarding Shabbos. We don't say that. What does the Brisa say? The Brisa says that some of the laws are similar. You have, for example, if you have vertical poles, that would be a similar law that would work for both. Not because it's a law of Shabbos, it works for Sukkah, or it's a wall of Sukkah, it works for Shabbos. It works. It works for Sukkah, it works for Shabbos. It happens to be a mutual law, a law that's that works for other areas, not just for one. It works for Shabbos, it works for Sukkah. It happens to be a multi-denominational law. But the law of two walls, the law of having majority open, and yet it could be a kosher wall. That works for a sukkah, but it won't work for Shabbos. We don't say, since it's a wall for sukkah, it's a wall for Shabbos. So according to this Brisa, it seems like Rava's idea. Rava came up with this great, brilliant idea. Well, if it's considered a wall for this, it's considered a wall for that. But you know what? We have a Brisa that says you can't go that far. Rava, you went a little too far. You want to say that this wall will be a kosher Reshus Hayachid, private domain. That's taking it too far. Brisa seems to say not that way. And what are the words of the Brisa? V'yasera Shabbos al Sukkah. And Shabbos is more strict than Sukkah. There are certain laws that don't work for Sukkah. They work for that don't work for Shabbos. Shabbos is more strict than Sukkah. Shabbos ain't any terrace. Shabbos is not permitted. Ela ba'im and merub ala parts. Only if it's more solid than breached. Masha ain't b'sukkah. That's not true by a sukkah. Sukkah, you can even have a kosher sukkah if it's more breached than solid. My love, what is this saying? Isn't it saying is Seira Shabbos the sukkah, a sukkah, that the Shabbos of sukkahs is going to have more stringencies than the regular sukkah during the week? That on the sukkah Shabbos of sukkahs, you're not going to be able to carry in it. Even though on the sukkah during the week, this is a regular sukkah. And we won't say the law of migu. So it seems like it's proving Rava, or I should say Rabbah, wrong. And the Gemara answers that no, you learned the Brisa wrong. Loi. No, that's not the meaning of this Brisa. Yesera Shabbos the Alma, Shabbos the Sukkah. That the Shabbos during the year is more chamor, is more strict than the Shabbos on Sukkos. That Shabbos on Sukkos you can do migu. It's Shabbos during the year that you don't do this, that you can't consider this a wall, a private domain. But the Shabbos of Sukkos is actually a special law that it will be considered kosher because you have the concept that Rabbah introduces called migu. That since it's considered a law regarding this, considered a law regarding that. That concept is actually correct. In what the Brisa means is that there's a difference in laws. He's saying the difference on regular Shabbos versus the Shabbos of Sukkot. So what would that mean? That would mean that when you have this sukkah that has two walls, one of the walls has a big doorway, and the other, third wall has a tefach, and that's considered a kosher sukkah. Two walls and a tefach and a handbreadth for the third wall is a kosher sukkah, even though one of the walls has a doorway. And that doorway makes it that its majority is open. And that sukkah is a kosher sukkah. Not only is it kosher during the week of Sukkot, it's actually kosher for the Shabbos of Sukkot. Why would it be kosher for the Shabbos of Sukkot? Because since it's a wall regarding Sukkah, it's considered a wall regarding the laws of Shabbos as well. And it would work on the Shabbos of Sukkot. Now, will it work during the summer? You want it now in the summer, you go out and have your Shabbos dinner in that sukkah. Your sukkah is still up. You never took it down. Go now during the summer and enjoy a nice Shabbos afternoon cholent in your sukkah. Can it work? No, you can't go there on a regular Shabbos. Why not? Because on Sukkot, it's called a wall. It's not Sukkot now. On Sukkot, we'll call it a wall. It's considered a domain, a private domain. Now, not really. It's not a domain. Majority is open. Majority open doesn't work to make it a private domain. So that's what the meaning of the Brisa is. So we've now switched the meaning of the Brisa to be comparing not Sukkah to Shabbos, but the Shabbos of year round to the Shabbos on Sukkot. That's what the Bryce is comparing. The Gemara says, "Ihachi." If so, Lisni nami. Let it also say another case. Yasera Sukkah di Alma, Sukkah de Shabbos. That you have a more strict law of the Sukkah during the year than the Sukkah of Shabbos. The Sukkah, I should say, during the other days of Sukkot, are more strict than the Sukkah of Shabbos. That the Sukkah during the week is going to be more strict than the Sukkah of Shabbos. The ilu Sukkah di Alma boy tefach soichik, because the regular week that you have the Sukkah up for the week of Sukkot, that what do you need for your third wall? You would need a tefach soichik, a loose handbreadth for the third wall. The ilu Sukkah de Shabbos, but on the Shabbos of Sukkot, guess what? You can get away. You don't need a third wall that's going to be a tefach. It's enough to have a lechi, which is a little beam, a little pole. You could have a pole. It's good enough. Because you, Rabbah, are the source regarding the laws of Shabbos that you said, if you put a schach on top of a alleyway, as long as one of the walls, you have two parallel walls, as long as one of the walls has a lechi, has this pole next to it, it's considered like a wall. A pole is considered a mechitza regarding the laws of Shabbos. And you are the one who says that it's kosher. So what would happen during the week of Sukkot? You have these two walls. You have schach on top. And you put up a lechi, which is, according to Rabbah, that lechi is considered a wall, not just a hector. It's not just a recognition, but it's actually considered a wall. And he would say that that's a kosher sukkah on Shabbos of Sukkot, because the law of private domain works over there. That would be considered a private domain. And he says, if so, it would work for the Sukkot, for the Shabbos on Sukkot, but it's not going to work during the week of Sukkot. So here you have an opposite scenario where something might be good for Shabbos, but it won't work during the week in other words, before we spoke about a case that since something's a wall for a sukkah, it'll be a wall also on the Shabbos of sukkahs. Now we're picking like the opposite type of case. Since something is considered a wall regarding Shabbos, we're going to allow it to be considered a wall regarding Sukkot. But when would that be a wall? Only on the Shabbos. That would mean that during the week of Sukkot, you wouldn't be allowed to use this sukkah because it only has two walls plus a little pole. But that pole is nowhere near what it needs to be in order to be a kosher sukkah. And so for Shabbos, it'll work on Sukkot, but it won't work during the week of Sukkot. So the Gemara says, you're the one who says that a schach on top of a mavoi works. On top of this alley, you put schach on top, it works, as long as you have a lechi there. So if so, why doesn't the Brisa say this case as well? If this is the meaning of the Brisa, that migu works, let it give the alternative case as well. If it doesn't mean that migu works, then it makes sense that it only said that one case. That it has a case where you have a more strict law on one of them over the other. But if you're telling me the law of migu works, then it should work this way as well. And it should say both scenarios. So the Gemara says that Hahu layet that case, it doesn't need to tell us. We don't need to know that you could have a case that Sukkah during the week would be more strict on the Sukkah on Shabbos, because Hashta Mikilsa Lechamirta Amruna, here we're saying that you could take something from the lenient rules of Sukkah and the lenient laws of Sukkah and use it to tell you a law regarding Shabbos, and we'll use a migu to permit it, even though Shabbos is generally more strict. Shabbos carries with it capital punishment, and yet we're going to take something from the lenient laws of Sukkah to permit something that regarding the strict laws of Shabbos. So mechamirta lekilta lekolshkein, can't we for sure use the laws of Shabbos to permit on the Sukkos of that on the day of Sukkot that falls that Shabbos, for sure that would be permissible to use, even though the rest of Sukkot it wouldn't be okay, but we would allow it on the Shabbos of Sukkot. So again, we've got this special law that Shabbos of Sukkot can get away with a Sukkah that during the week of Sukkot wouldn't work. Why would it work on the Shabbos of Sukkot? Because it's okay for a private, it's considered like a private domain. We're permitting it to be considered like a private domain. And therefore, if it'll work regarding Sukkot as well. We're considering it considered a third wall. We're considering it a wall. Regarding Shabbos of Sukkot, on that day, we're going to permit it for a sukkah as well. We're going to say this is a kosher sukkah. Now, why didn't it say this case in the Brisa? Because of course, if something works for Shabbos, it's going to work for Sukkot. The question was, if something works for Sukkot, could it work for Shabbos? That's what it wanted to say. This case is obvious. If something works for Shabbos, for sure you can use it for Sukkot. For sure, it'll be a kosher. Okay, it won't work during the rest of Sukkot, but it'll work on the Shabbos of Sukkot. Why? Because we're learning the Shabbos. If it works with Shabbos, of course, there's no question it'll work for Sukkah. So the point that the Gemara is making here at the end is that the concept of that Rabbah is revealing to us, called migu. This concept called migu, it works on Sukkot. And Rabbah gave a case where it's a very unique case and it would work. For sure, the other case would also work. It just didn't mention it. Why didn't it mention it? Because that's obvious. This case is not as much of a innovation than the case that Rabbah brought. Rabbah brought a much more innovative case. So that's basically the concept over here that the Gemara brings, is that Rabbah comes up with this special law called migu, that if something's considered a wall regarding the laws of Sukkah, it could even be used as regarding the laws of Shabbos. Do we use it the opposite way as well? If something's a wall regarding Shabbos, it could be used for Sukkah. For sure, we could use it that way, because the Shabbos is much more strict laws. So for sure, we could use it the other way. But the innovation of Rabbah is even this way, even going in this direction, where Sukkah is much more lenient, and yet we're going to say if it's a wall for Sukkah, we're going to call it a wall for Shabbos. So that's basically this. Gemara is revealing to us this concept called migu. One of the questions that the commentaries asks over here is, we're using this migu, it's a wall for this, it should be a wall for that. What about doing the opposite? If it's not a wall for this, it shouldn't be a wall for that. Maybe we should use it to say the opposite law, that it is not a wall regarding Shabbos, so it shouldn't be a wall regarding Sukkah. Maybe we should use it to go in the opposite direction. Well, how do we know to be lenient over here? Maybe we should go be strict. So the answer that he gives is that since the laws of Sukkot is a 7-day holiday, so one of the days has to be a Shabbos. You can't get a Sukkot without having a Shabbos. There's no Sukkot, no matter what day it falls on, it's for sure going to have a Shabbos in it. And if the Torah tells us that this is a kosher sukkah, it must be telling us that it's good for Shabbos as well. So that's the understanding of the Gemara, that we're going to be lenient to this. Going to say that if this works regarding the laws of Sukkot, it's going to work as well for the laws of Shabbos, and it's really Rabba's special law that he revealed to us, that the concept of migu, you could use this concept of migu. Now the Gemara says gufa. Gufa means it itself. And what it means when the Gemara brings gufa means we just mentioned this law itself earlier. We just mentioned a law, and we're going to discuss it now. Amar Rabba said, this law we just mentioned, that Sikech, and now we turn the page, we're on page 7b, Sikech al gabe mavui, sheyesh loy lechi, shera. If a person puts schach on top of a mavui, on top of a alley, as long as there's a lechi, which is this little pole, keshera, it's a kosher sukkah. And we explained the reason why it's a kosher sukkah. It'll be a kosher sukkah because since it works for Shabbos to make it considered a private domain, it'll work for Sukkot to make it considered a wall. It'll only work on the Shabbos Sukkot, but it'll work on Sukkot. It'll be considered a kosher sukkah. There is a discussion, I should say, about if it works during the rest of Sukkot, but seemingly it would only work on the Shabbos of Sukkot, and work because it's considered a wall regarding Eruv, regarding private domain. It's considered a wall regarding a sukkah. Now, V'amar Rabba said another, Sikech al gabe pase birois. If a person puts schach on top of those walls of a well, and the walls of a well, we've learned earlier, are basically, it's four beams, four thick beams that are around, that are placed at the corners of a square around a outside well. We wanted to permit for the animals to be able for you to bring water and feed the animals. And once we permitted this, we permitted as well for human consumption as well. Anyone can, it's basically considered a private domain. And you have these beams, or I guess almost like a pillar. It's a thick beam, like maybe like some type of a
board,
a column. Yeah, maybe. So you have this column board, but it's considered a kosher eruv. What happens if you put schach on top? So sikech al gabe pase birois. If you put schach on top of it, what would be the law? We said that it's considered you're allowed to carry there regarding giving water to the animals and then to people as well. So what happens if you put schach on top for a sukkah? So Rabbah says, you know what? Sheva. It is kosher. It is kosher. And even though normally we would say you need two solid walls, this is nowhere near a solid wall. These are four beams around, that are in the corners around a well, the four corners, and making a square around a well, and you don't have any walls. You don't have any solid walls, and yet we're gonna say Rabbah says this is kosher. Now,
Rabbi, question.
yes, yes, Ezra,
Yeah,
yes.
from what I've learned of Eruvin, the distance between the two posts were such to allow two-way traffic for a set of oxen pulling a cart. So we're talking quite a distance between the walls. So it's not like you're talking about you know, a small
Small area, right?
So maybe I gotta wait until you discuss all of this, but from what I remember of Erevin, it's just a creation in order to be able to use the well. But the separation between the two posts are quite large.
Uh-huh. So generally, the rule of with regard to these type of situations where you have a breach is there's a measurement of 10 amos. Now I'd have to look up the law there. I didn't look it up to see what the specifics are regarding how big. But if it's 10 if it's less than 10 amos, then there shouldn't be any. It seemingly would be considered considered okay. Again, it's a rabbinic it's a rabbinic law in the first place, and it's a permit from the rabbis that they allowed this to be acceptable, to be considered a wall. But once it's considered a wall regarding the Eruv law, it would be considered a wall also regarding the law of Sukkah. And what's unique about this is normally you need two walls. And yet here you don't have any solid walls. And yet it's going to be kosher. Now, the Gemara wants to know, so what's the difference between these two rules? Rabbah said two things here. Really, he said three things. First, he said this law regarding Migu dehavi doifen lenyan sukkah, when you have two walls and the third wall that's a tefach, that works for Shabbos. And then he said pschach on top of a mavoy would work for the Shabbos of Sukkot. And then he said schach on top of pasei birois would work for the Shabbos of Sukkot. Now, so the bottom line is he's got these three heterim, three leniencies, three lenient rules that Rabbah is revealing to us. Shabbos of Sukkot, you're going to be able to do three things. Number one, you have a two-walled sukkah with a third tefach that you can carry on that sukkah. It's private domain on Shabbos of Sukkot. Number two, you got the law of a mavoy, which has two solid walls parallel to each other, and you have a lechi, you have a pole next to those two walls, next to one of the two walls. That's considered a good enough to for sukkah. It's a kosher, considered a kosher sukkah, even though you don't have the rules of the third wall. Third wall normally needs a tefach or four tefachim in this scenario because they're parallel walls, or maybe more. It's not a simple thing. And he says this is okay because it's kosher because it works for the laws of Shabbos. So it will work on the Shabbos of Sukkot. And then he has a final law that the Sikech al Gabi Pase Birois, that if you put schach on top of these poles that are thick poles, that's also going to be kosher for the Shabbos of Sukkot, even though you don't have any walls at all. So it's not like you don't have the third wall, which was the other scenario. You don't have a third wall. Okay, we have two. You have two parallel walls. Here, you don't even have two walls, two solid walls. So the Gemara says utsricha. We need all of these cases. It needs to teach us, Rabbah needs to spell out all of these unique laws, and one of them would not be known from the other. The Iash Be'inan Mavoy, if it only said the case of a Mavoy of the two solid walls with the schach on top, and it told us that that works for the Shabbos of Sukkot. If it has a lechi, if it has this pole next to it, mishum deika shtei defanos ma'al yasa, because there are two solid walls. Abel gabi pasi birois, but the case of the beams of the walls that are around a well, which are very small, not really considered walls. These walls, the leka shtei defanos ma'al yasa, you don't have two appropriate walls. Aimalai, I would say that wouldn't work.
I don't hear you. I'll talk later.
The E, and if Ashbeinan Pasi Birois, if it told me the law of the walls of a well, which are not appropriate walls, and it says that that's a kosher sukkah on the Shabbos of Sukkot, Mishum Deika Shame Arba Defanis, because it is considered like four walls. It has the name of four walls. It's not physically four walls. Has the name of four walls. Halachically, it's considered like four walls. But if you put schach on top of a mavoi, now that mavoi, the lekash deimar badafanos, over there you don't have four walls, because the fourth wall is completely open, and the third wall has a lechi. So there, I would say we wouldn't use the concept of migoy to permit such a sukkah. And therefore, you need to know that law. In other words, Pasei Birois is a very unique law. It's a special law. You don't have four walls, but you know what? We call it four walls. But what about the case of Pasei Birois? What about the case of the Mavoy, where you really don't have a fourth? You only have three walls, and even the third wall is really a questionable third wall. It's just the lechi, and yet we're going to say that that is considered a kosher sukkah. That is a law you wouldn't know from Pasi Birois, because you really don't have anything for a fourth wall. At least Pasi Birois has something called a fourth wall. And then the Gemara says, V'yash minan hanitarti, and if it only said these two cases, and it didn't say the first case, which was the topic of our conversation initially, the main discussion with Rabbah and Abaye, that in that case, if it only said these two, and it didn't say that case, where you have two walls in the tefach, so I would say, these laws are cases where we're going from the Chomer law of Shabbos, the strict laws of Shabbos, and we're saying that it'll work for the Sukkah laws as well. It's okay. It's going to work for Sukkahs. Sukkah is much more lenient. You don't have capital punishment. It works for Shabbos. Mechamirta lekilta. Aval mikilta lechamirta. But from kilta, from the lenient law of Sukkah, to say this is going to work for Shabbos, kilta lechamirta, aimalai, I would say it won't work. So the Gemara says, tzricha, it needed to tell us that law as well, that regarding the Shabbos of Sukkot, if you have a typical Sukkah, which is the two-walled Sukkah with that extra handbreadth, that will work even for Shabbos, even though it's kosher for a sukkah, which is only a lenient law, and it's kosher there, and that shouldn't really play any role. It shouldn't have an effect on Shabbos, but even there, we're going to say, yes, it'll actually have an impact on the strict laws of Shabbos, and it'll say that you can even use it for Shabbos. So this is a very, really complicated laws over here regarding comparing the laws of Shabbos and Sukkah, but the bottom line is that we see that the Gemara understands that you can have certain leniencies because of laws that apply in one rule in one case. They can apply in other cases as well. and we found three such scenarios. Now, I should mention regarding what we said about the majority being open, that normally that doesn't work on Shabbos. Shabbos, when you have majority of open space, that doesn't work for to make something a private domain. It has to be more solid, majority solid than open. So Tosfos gets into the question of what about half and half? What would be the case if it's half and half? Do we consider that similar to majority solid or similar to the majority open? And Tosfos says from our brisa, it sounds like half and half doesn't work. And it says it needs to be for Shabbos, you need to have oimed meruba. You need more solid than open. What does that sound like? If Shabbos needs more solid than open, it sounds like half and half is not good enough. It needs more solid. You need to have majority solid. So Tosfos is bothered with the fact that the Gemara in Eruvin doesn't use this as a proof, because the Gemara in Eruvin deals with this question, and Rav Papa is the one who actually says the opposite. Rav Papa over there holds that the half and half is good enough for Shabbos. It's okay if it's half and half. And so the question is, the brisa seems to prove the opposite opinion, that half and half is no good. You need majority solid. So Tosfos gets into that, and Tosfos says that the halacha follows that half and half is good according to Rav Papa, and the Gemara there brings a proof against Rav Papa from one brisa. It really could have brought from our brisa as well, and it just didn't because it in the end Rav Papa has a source from a Mishnah, so he holds one way, the brisa holds the other way. So it comes out that it's an argument if half and half is good, half and half isn't good. That's a debate over there if it works. And then I did want to mention also that the case that I gave over here regarding if you have vertical poles, and the vertical poles don't touch each other, but they're within 3 handbreadths, that's considered a kosher sukkah. Vertical poles. It's kosher for Shabbos, and it's kosher for sukkah. Really, that law applies also if they're all horizontal. So if you somehow have horizontal beams, or somehow you have a horizontal belt, going around, that could be kosher as well. I just gave the example of vertical, but the same law would apply if it's horizontal. And even though there's nothing going vertically, it's all just horizontal things, and it's within 8 inches. In other words, 3 handbreadths. It's within 3 handbreadths of each other. That would be considered also kosher for private domain, considered for Shabbos, the laws of Eruv. It's considered kosher to carry it. It would be kosher as well for a sukkah. Even though you don't only have things going one direction, you don't have going the opposite direction. It's considered kosher as well. That's what the meaning of that Gemara was. I gave the example of vertical, but the same thing would apply to horizontal. We had a very unique law there that even though they're not touching us, majority is open, but that's a case where we call it majority is closed. That's not the case where majority is open, even though it is majority open, majority breached. But nevertheless, because it's within 3 handbreadths of each other, all the poles, that's considered a solid sukkah and a solid eruv. It's considered a solid private domain. That is kosher. And that applies whether they're vertical or horizontal. Okay, we're going to stop here. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Sei gesund.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Rabbi.
Rabbi.
Have a great day.